Welcome everyone. Marlon Nunn you're a crime writer predominantly. In fact, I was going to say, I did my podcast. I did our podcast today, Malla, and I thought of you because today would have been the 100th birthday for PD James.
Oh goodness!
How about that? So she was a fairly prominent.
Yeah.
Yes. So anyway, as we were saying, 100 years today since the birth of PD James, who wrote a whole bunch of books, including the Adam Dalgliesh books, and apparently had no less than seven honorary doctorates from universities around the UK. And funnily enough, was also fiercely anti-Scottish independence, for what that's worth. But we're not here to talk about him. We're here to talk to Marlon Nunn, who is a crime writer, and more recently, a young adult writer of this lovely book, When the Ground is Hard, which is set in Swaziland, where you were born. Is that right, Mother?
Yes. I literally wrote what I knew. So it's set in a boarding school for mixed race children in Swaziland, and that's exactly where I got my beginning of my education, was at a boarding school for mixed race children in Swaziland. So yeah, I didn't even think of the idea for the book. My agent had sent my first YA book was super terrible, but it was just full of tropes and it was just awful. But I had sent a little bio thing with the manuscript, and an editor in New York had said, if I was willing to write a book about a boarding school in Swaziland, she would read it.
And so apparently publish it.
Yeah, I thought, okay, I can do that. I can do this. Again, my agent was really keen. She was like, hey, it's not something that gets done every day. Whereas my failed manuscript was pretty much, just as I said, full with every YA trope you could possibly find. So that got ditched, and I went on to write this.
So what was the main premise of the book is a young girl, very much like yourself, a mixed race girl who goes to a boarding school, and one of the things that really kind of I found quite lovely about this book is, in a perverse kind of way, was the sense of isolation that you managed to. You're raising your hand, Jane. Are you agreeing? Is that what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. We were being really naughty, because it turns out that she was in my brother's class at school. Sorry. Oh my God.
Okay, well, I'm confused, so let's just carry on with the interview.
Yeah, sorry.
So yeah, the sense of isolation that you get from that we get from this book, place is really important in your writing. So I remember you spoke to me in the past about how you came to be a crime writer, that moment when you kind of your brain started to spin into an idea, but it was very much around place, wasn't it? Would you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Look, I find it just easy. My sense of place is very much cemented in South Africa and in the landscape. So I find it very easy to imagine it. I find it very easy to situate myself back in the landscape there. And I grew up in the country. I grew up in the boondocks. So that whole sense of isolation was pretty much how I grew up. We grew up way away from all the towns, and we grew up very rurally. And so I spent much of my time, we spent an awful lot of time a tremendous amount of walking, because my father had cars that always broke down. So we would end up going on a journey, and like halfway through, my dad would say, oh, the engine's packed up, and then we just walk the rest of the way with our little bags, So I'm very centered in that landscape. I feel it very strongly. I feel it also actually interests me when I go out to, especially in Western Australia, the couple of times, twice I went out to the Kimberley. That landscape is so powerful that you can feel it like coming into you.
Yeah, I remember a couple of years ago doing a trip out that way across from Port Hedland across to Newman, which is one of the things that and
That's true.
it's Namatjira country. And when you look at Namatjira's paintings, you go, he obviously, there was something wrong with his eyes because nobody could have seen colours that vivid. But they're exactly right, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. And also it's one of those places where when you're in the Kimberley, and to me, when I'm in Southern Africa, I don't imagine I'm anywhere else. I don't compare that place with anywhere else. I'm simply there. That's how powerful that landscape is to me. So, people make jokes about, oh, it's the Paris end of Perth, or it's the Paris end of it. The Kimberley and South Africa to me are never the Paris end of anything. They're just absolutely themselves. Really powerful, wonderful landscapes.
And of course, you moved to Perth when your family came from South Africa and Swaziland. And I was very amused the other day when you said that people in South Africa talk about someone is PFP. What's that stand for again?
Yeah, PFP is packing for Perth.
Packing for Yeah, right.
It's a shorthand. So people will say, well, hey, did you hear he's PFP? And that means that they've got their ticket out. But absolutely, it is such a well-trodden path that when we were visiting South Africa, if you're on a very skinny road going through a national park, people will pull up next to you and you'll have conversations. Oh, hey, what have you seen? And every time we say we're from Australia, we'd get, I've got a cousin in Melbourne. Do you know her? Her name is Susan.
Right.
Everyone we met had a cousin, auntie, uncle who had come to Australia, and they thought there was some chance that we knew them. But absolutely, yes, packing for Perth. Very South African.
So that moment that I alluded to a moment ago, where you were in a beautiful place in Africa, and a thought came to your mind, and that was sort of the beginning of your journey as a writer. Can you talk to us about that?
Oh, yeah. See, I've been reading crime for ages. I really like crime. I love reading it. I find it kind of exciting, page turning. Plus, often lots of stuff. It's also very placed in like a specific area and time, and I like that about it. But I just made a documentary in Swaziland with my mother, and then I got married while I was over there. My now husband came over to join me, and we got married. And we were by the side of a river in South Africa, and I just had this incredibly vivid image of a body in the water, and all I knew is that it was a policeman. And then I was like, oh, that's really cool. I wonder what that means. I wonder what the story is. And then I came back and I actually just started writing from that image. And then because I'm not a plotter, I'm a pantser. So I never plot. I just basically wander around, and the story has its way with me. And sometimes I go off on the wrong track, and then I get back again. But yeah, for that, it was absolutely just looking at that image and trying to figure out who the person was.
But presumably that's a tricky thing for a crime writer to be. I would have thought, not having written a lot of that kind of stuff myself, I would have thought that you need to have a rough idea of where things are going before you kick on, or do you literally not know where you're headed when you start writing?
No, it's very frustrating for my husband. Because I'll come into bed and go, that didn't work out at all. He wasn't the killer.
Because of course the story that goes with Broadchurch, which I think you and I talked about, but the show Broadchurch, was that first season, none of the actors, until they shot that last scene that revealed who had been responsible for the death of the child, none of the actors even knew, but presumably the writers knew. So
yeah. Look, television, you're burning, and film, you're burning money. Of course, you have to know where you're going. And even then, I've talked to lots of TV writers where they're saying lots of things shift and change as they're shooting, and that's partly got to do with sometimes they'll find that one particular actor is very strong, or that the certain storylines are. They're constantly picking and reconstituting things as they roll along for the series, but they do have a sense of that, yes, because often they're often plotting season 2 as well. So they do have to have some forward thing. But as a novelist, I don't really have that pressure. Don't
you find you get immensely and massively edited?
No, I don't, because then I go through and I edit myself, or I'll go the wrong area and it will take me a while to go, oh, well, I guess I have to throw that away, and I go back and I redo it. And also my husband is he's an editor. He's an ex-editor. So before it goes to my agent or a publishing house, I'll give it to him to read. And he'll say simple things like, well, I don't understand. When that scene, why does that happen? Then I have to answer very logical questions. But I don't get that massively edited, not at all. It takes me a long time to write books, and I often edit and re-edit as I go. Yeah.
So what is it about the crime genre that really appeals to you as a writer? Is that sense of not knowing where you're going when you start, and what is it that appeals to you?
It is, but there's always a question to be answered at the beginning of a crime novel. And your job then is to answer that question. Who did that? Why? How is my detective going to find that? I find it very self-directional, crime. Crime is actually like, this is an investigation. So there's a tremendous amount of logic that goes into who does what, who looks into what, where, you know. So I'm guided by just the train of an investigation. With the YA stuff, that floored me. That's why my first manuscript was so bad. I didn't actually understand how to work through a story that really wasn't an investigation. Do you know what I'm saying?
Except you did tell me in our interview that you couldn't help yourself. You had to put a deadly crime in your YA book, didn't you?
I'm a sucker. What can I say? I'm a sucker for any kind of crime. But it kind of felt a little bit like the big incident that happens in the book. I don't want to spoil it, but I thought to myself, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to put a crimey thing in here. And my husband read the first draft and he said, why are you avoiding the obvious? Something happens and it's terrible. And so I went back and I realized I'd always knew it was going to happen. I just wanted to break away from crime.
But it's not really the point of the book, though, is it? It's really more a fulcrum for some character development that occurs down the track.
Yeah, that's right. So I had to kind of change that sort of crime machine that happens where you're on the investigation, it's got to be solved, and suddenly it was, this is why it really helps to have like my husband, who's a huge reader and, as I said, an ex-editor, and also an agent who's very canny story-wise, is that there was a particular point in the book where I didn't know what was going to happen, and my husband asked me a couple of questions and the answers came to me. So but I find crime it's very encased. The question is asked, and my job is to answer the question. The crime, it poses the question, and then I answer it through writing the book. And that's why I like it. That's why I like it so much. But I'm also loving YA, because YA is it's just opened up a different part of my brain.
Well, the obvious question then regarding the YA, I mean, you've talked about how it was really, it just sort of, you fell into it because it was fairly close to your own experience and so forth. Mm-hmm. Have you got another YA up your sleeve, or is that it for now until something more interesting happens?
Well, I got, when I sold When the Ground is Hard to Putnam, it was on a 2-book deal. So I had a second manuscript, and it was contractually a young adult manuscript. So I couldn't go and write a crime and then hand that in. It had to be another young adult. And then even then I kind of stuck close to home, in that it's also set in South Africa, and it's about some girls growing up in a township. And that was very much, and a sort of a family conflict that has to be, a family mystery that has to be solved. But that was very much based on visiting Durban with my mother, and a cousin of mine saying, I'll take you out to where I live. And she lives in a township. And it's just it's not imaginable for Australians. These places are just so far out of our reasoning. And the crowded minibuses going there, just the absolute chaos. But there's something actually really beautiful about the chaos, except there is this kind of just a slight vibration when you're there of knowing that something bad could happen to you. It might just would have been my Australian sensibility. But so the second YA is set in the township, and it is very much based on the feeling I had when I was there visiting my cousin. It was for a day, and then just the kind of sense of violence that seems to go through so much of South Africa. Like in Durban, walking with my mother, it's the first time I ever saw a dead body on the street, just lying there. And there was this huge amount of blood going into the gutter. from this man. And our driver, so South African, said, oh, shame, it's probably just robbed for his pay. And off we went.
Oh, no.
You know? Yeah, he got hurt. Yeah, it happens because he was outside. It was right near an ATM. You know, so to me, maybe that's why I keep going back to South Africa. It's such a fraught place to me, and I hate it and I love it, and I want to blow it all up, but I want to keep going back. So I suppose I've got this kind of bizarre love relationship with South Africa. But so yeah, my second YA is set in a township in South Africa.
So you're South African Swaziland by birth, living in Australia, writing about a coloured girl in your home country. What parallels do you see in Australian young adult writing?
All right. Look, I think that the whole entire coming of age tale is completely universal. So the parallel would be that when you get to a certain age, people move from being, you move from being a child to an adult, and that's a bridge that everyone has to walk over. We just have different obstacles in our way, depending if you're in Swaziland or in a small country town, or you're a half Aboriginal boy in Western Australia, and you're trying to solve what's happened to this girl that's gone missing, or all these bridges, they're just universal, and you have to cross them, and that's what YA is often about, is about crossing that bridge. So for me, those are the parallels. We all get to find out, we're trying to figure out where we are, what our place in the world is. And I think Australia, South Africa, America, that's often at the heart of so many YAs. Yeah. Indeed.
I'll get you to read something if you're happy to. But before you do that, I haven't asked you that beforehand, so sorry to spring that on you. But I think we'd rather hear it in your voice than mine. Did anyone have any questions for Malla while she's working out what she's going to read?
Oh.
Please feel free to jump in and you're happy with that, Malla? If people just throw questions
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I'm here.
I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes.
I wasn't sure if my computer was working well. I'm wondering whether or not in your crime novels they're completely inspired by your time also in Swaziland. Are you using those moments, like the body in the street? Is all of that history part of that writing?
Yeah, look, it comes into it because it ends up that it's not that South Africa is wildly criminal, but there's so many crossing of lines, especially when you have a regime that decides where people are going to live, who they're going to speak to, who they're going to sleep with. I mean, so everything kind of becomes a crime in that sense. And my community being mixed, we were always in this weird crossover thing where we were like, it was partly criminal, any of the associations that were in that sort of area, and even in the YA thing, it's people crossing over lines that they have been told they can't cross over. But absolutely, when I was researching my first crime book, I went to see an uncle of mine, and I just knew he'd been in the language of my family, naughty. So I went to him and I said, "Hey, why do you think South Africans are so blunt?" And he said, "Look, Malla, it's an entire." He said it's almost like a country of criminals. And I said, "Well, that's a big statement." And he said,
country of what? Sorry, criminals.
Criminals.
Right.
Criminals. And he said, "I'll tell you why." And he said, "Because I used to be a criminal." And I was like, "Oh, okay." He said, "Yeah, my specialty was stealing from building sites." And he said, "This is how it worked. Myself and my brother were mixed race. We have a truck. We have 2 black guys that come with us, and we rob the building sites." And he said, "I never, ever sold to anyone but a white man." So he said, it's just an entire network of people, again, finding ways around the law. And, people don't even talk about it like, "Oh, yeah, he's a criminal." They just go, "He was a bit naughty. He made money on the side." Does it
strike you as a bit surreal now? I mean, when did apartheid officially come to an end? I know that, in practical sense, there's still, elements of it. But when was it that it actually came to an end officially?
It was early 80s.
Early 80s,
I think.
Because I remember growing up, and it was just sort of South Africa as the place, because I'm a mad cricket fan, so the rebel tours and all that stuff. And can you imagine in this day and age a state like South Africa existing as it was then? What I mean is,
yes,
yeah. Don't we all feel like the world's on a weird slide where that just might happen in 3, 5 years?
But as a global community, people just kind of went, oh, that's just South Africa. That's just how it is. Do you think it would be met that way these days? I'm not trying to make a political point. I'm genuinely interested.
No. I'm actually thinking about it because
I think if any regime now said we're going to segregate people based on colour, and I know that I think the greater community would go, well, no, you can't do that. And
yeah, it's a bit tricky because probably father and mother states have been a little bit more. They're not as outward about doing these things. So if you look at examples all over the world, of course, people are being segregated and being forced to change their religions and being told they can't live in certain places. I mean, it is pretty much like stamped on the world that these things
Palestine,
happen.
West Bank, all that sort of thing.
Exactly. You don't. Most people don't want to be too forward about it now because the international community can't put pressure on you. But it's happening. It's still happening. It's still happening. Maybe not as the grand scale.
But it was so out in the open in the 80s, though, wasn't it? It was so out in the open.
Yeah. They believed they were right.
Right.
Absolutely. And it's still in living memory. One of the first people to ever get on a bus was Lewis, the congressman who just died in America. It's in living memory. And he just died. So that's not very far behind us. No. So if we actually think, hey, we're on our way, and the path is smooth, I can see.
I'm not suggesting that for a moment.
But as a Baptist, backsliding happens all the time. So yeah, I'm not sure that they would be as outward about it now. Yeah, that's what.
Can I ask a question? I think that there's something about we outsource those sorts of discriminations that are to other mechanisms than the nation state, which is what it was in South Africa. But it happens in all sorts of insidious and blatant ways in so many places, but not in the same ways. Which brings me to my question. When you said earlier, Malla, that, or Jane's introduced this idea that there's so much writing about place, but it's also very temporally located. So, the time that your young adult fiction novel, which I just read over the weekend and was really terrific, it's a particular time and place. And I gather, I haven't read the adult novels yet, but it looks like they're very precisely situated 1 year after each other, isn't it?
Yes.
So would you like to talk a little bit about time and how it intersects with place? And how do you make a novel set, decades ago speak to people in the present? Let's say young people who don't know anything about that history that we all know something about.
Right. The crime novels are set from about 1953, which is sort of the year after the nationalist government came to South Africa, and apartheid, which had always been informal. But it became absolutely the law, the letter of the law, before people would kind of turn a blind eye to most things. And when I talked to my family, a lot before I decided to write about South Africa, and the early 50s kept coming up as, oh yeah, that was the time it changed. Before, if you got on a bus and you were mixed, everyone kind of would go, they shouldn't really be sitting this close to the front, but there would be no challenge. And suddenly policemen were on the buses telling you to get off. And suddenly it became this huge police state matter. And I think that's why I said it then, because I was thinking, wow, there would be people there 3 or 4 years before had been living quite freely. They'd been looked down on, but they were living quite freely with whoever they wanted to live with. And suddenly it was a crime. And suddenly you had to keep hiding and lying and stuff like that. So that's why I said it in the 50s, because I felt like, what a challenging time. Everyone's rearranging all the boundaries. and some people have to figure out how to live within those boundaries. So that's why I set it in the 50s. And my YA book is set, very early 60s, because that was just before independence. So things changed a little bit after independence, but that was the kind of time, also that's the time I have the most amount of memory of being there. So it was set in that time, and that's just on the cusp of change, but I decided to pull back on a lot of political stuff. It was more broadly in the YA stuff, because I didn't want to go too deeply into that. But yeah, it's very much set on my memory, and it's very much set on the fact that literally a year, it's the beginning of agitation in Swaziland for liberation from the British Empire. But that was just very in the background, and things were very settled. Although, because South Africa already had apartheid, that is why this family is in the position they're in my YA novel. That's why the mother lives in Swaziland and can't live in South Africa. So that's why that time for me.
I had a question that's completely slipped my mind. What was it? It was a good one too. It was a good one.
It was a good one. Yeah.
It was. More observation really that, you've got these two girls in this school, and I think you're talking about it's written for modern kids, but it's telling a story of someone much older in terms of, back in the early 60s. But I think kids will get this, especially when you make the point that, the currency almost in the school is one book and a pair of underpants, and you can destroy someone's life by simply stealing their one pair of underpants while it's hanging on the line.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think I've got a question attached to that. I just thought that was a nice little shorthand for the poverty of that situation, if you like.
Yes. And also how everyone was so distinguished. And aren't we still, by money, aren't we still so envious of those that have more than us? And we get bombarded with these images all the time. So boarding school is just a very truncated version of things that still go on now, where am I pretty enough? Do I have the right clothing? Do I have enough friends? Are my friends good enough? Is my body okay? And also it always seems to be people who are very willing to pick on others. It's an easy mark. And I think
the people who have three pairs of underpants instead of one, right?
That's right. And the whole underwear inspection in my book, that's completely real from boarding school. It actually happened. Yep.
Anyone else have any questions at all? Or Malla, would you like to read for us? Are you happy to read for us?
Yeah. I always get sort of this horrible flashback to having to read in things like James Joyce in English in class at university, and I just couldn't get the language. It was horrible. But
you don't have that excuse this time because they're your words, aren't they?
No, you're right. I'll actually just start right at the beginning of When the Ground is Hard. And the structure of the book is that it's quite a few small chapters. So it's not, so we've got little bits and pieces of time that take up their own chapter. And this is the very beginning of the story, and it's called Dying Days. It's Thursday night, so we walk down Long Lift Street to the public telephone booth at the intersection of 3 footpaths called Left Path, Right Path, and Centre Path. My flashlight beam bounces the length of the dirt road and picks out uneven potholes and ground, of which there are many. Mrs. Button, who lives in the pink house behind the mechanic's workshop, says that all streets should be paved like they are in England, but we're not in England. We're in the British Protectorate of Swaziland, fenced in on all sides by Mozambique and the Republic of South Africa. So what does she know? Pick up the pace, Mother says in a fierce whisper. We can't be late. We hurry past mint brick houses with cracks of light spilling out from under locked front doors. Dogs bark in fenced yards. The curtain twitches and a face appears at us in the space the size of a hand. The face belongs to Miriam Dubé, the church minister's wife, who makes it her duty to spy on our weekly pilgrimage to the telephone box. It's dark, but I imagine that Mrs. Dubé's expression is smug disapproval. Mother holds her head up high, like she's balancing the weight of an iron crown or suffering a garland of thorns. The neighbors are jealous, she says. Jealous gossips who frown on her high heels and her dresses straight from Johannesburg that show too much leg. They know we have carpets in the living room, she says. We also have Christmas bicycles with flashing chrome in the backyard and new barter school shoes that smell of the factory under our bed. They have concrete floors, and if they do have rugs, they are sure to be ugly when compared to the tufted fields of purple flowers that bloom under our feet when we walk from the settee to the kitchen. That's why they hate us. That's why they won't stop to give us a lift when they see us walking to the other side of the road, weighed down with shopping bags. The Manzini market is 3 miles from our house, Mother says. 3 miles across dry fields pocked with snakes and scorpion holes. A dangerous walk. A Christian would see our suffering and pick us up, but our neighbours, who call themselves Christians and stuff the pews every Sunday, they drive by and leave us in their dust. The telephone box appears in my flashlight beam, a rectangle of silver metal cemented into the red earth. Right path, left path, and centre path split off and disappear into vacant land covered in weeds. Bored children and drunks have left their initials and their footprints on the glass walls, but by some miracle, the interior light gives off a faint glow, which attracts a circling cloud of white moths. Mother feeds 4 silver coins into the change slot and dials a number. Her hands shake and her breath comes short from walking the uneven ground in high heels. As a rule, she never leaves our house in flat sandals or, Lord save us, the loose cotton slippers worn by women who value comfort over fashion. The coins drop and she shapes her mouth into a smile. It's me, she says in a throaty whisper that she reserves for the telephone. Anyway, that's the beginning.
It was lovely. Anybody else have any questions for Malla at all? Now's your chance, folks. Jump in.
We're going to have to carry on our in-conversation.
I'd like someone else to participate in said conversation. Fire away, Jane. What have you got?
Oh, I just had a question about whether your books are for sale or published in Swaziland and South Africa.
All right. I've talked to some cousins who live in what's now called Eswatini, and they can't, the books are not in any of the, well, there's probably only literally, I'm not kidding, maybe one bookshop in the whole country, but they haven't been able to find the books there. But they are for sale in South Africa, because a couple of my cousins have bought them when they were in Durban or Joburg, and they've gone to the shops. So it is released in South Africa, definitely. But Swaziland's always been a bit of a side market in that, you know, you get books and they're often at the back of a store. There's a tiny, small amount of them, you know, but it's not a let's say it's not a big book market. So my cousins have to buy everything from South Africa, but it is available in South Africa. Yes.
Are your books well known? Are your crime books well known in South Africa?
Look, they're well known-ish if you're a crime writer. So I have lots of people in South Africa that I'm friends with on Facebook and Instagram that have read my books. You know, and so at the moment, there's a production company that's trying to put together a writer's room for the crime books to turn them into TV. So what we've done is we're specifically looking for a South African writer to bring on board if the writing room happens. And she's much younger than I am, and she'd not heard of my book, so we've had to send her stuff. But no, you know, yes, and really, I know a lot of South African crime writers. So, you know, we kind of exchange notes and stuff like that. But I was just happy to be in the South African market, really, to have my books in stores there.
Anyone else have a question?
I just had a quick one. Malla, having now written...
Make it a long one if you like, Michelle.
Yeah.
Now that you've written YA and crime, do you have a preference? Do you find your head flipping from one to the other, that you want to, having written a couple of YAs, do you want to go back to writing crime for a little while?
All right. Yeah. In the end, you know, after my 4th crime book, I felt a little bit sort of out of step with a lot of crime stuff. like, you know, I mean, I think my books are fairly page turnerish, but I was starting to read a lot of crime that I felt was, I felt it was like unnecessarily violent.
Yeah.
And quite cruel, and I didn't get it. And it was often set in countries where they've got a murder rate of like 1 per million, you know. So it began to feel very much like it was.
You're talking about noir, like the Swedish noir.
What? Really? Could it be? Yeah. I mean, and another thing about, just on a sidebar, about what they call Nordic noir. How many murders and how many people with multiple personality disorders? It got to the point where I'd be reading a book and going, three of the people have multiple personalities, but they're bold.
The thing is, Malla, that as I said to you the other day when we spoke, you know, who's ever going to move to Midsummer? Because
exactly.
But who's going to move to Reykjavik at the moment? Like, Jesus, it's just a nightmare, isn't it? The midnight sun sends people crazy, I think.
And also, what's fascinating to me about like even like say Iceland and stuff is, I mean, can you ever imagine a policeman saying, "Did you recognize him?" They go, "Oh yeah, he's my cousin," because they're all related. Well, for some reason, it'll be somebody who's blind or can't. I'm sorry, officer, and the amount of phones that ran out of juice. Like, I've read a lot of crime, and when you start to see certain things happening, and that was partly, and I've noticed a lot of retrospective crime now, where crime's been committed and people have been punished, and then one of the central people in the crime comes back and says, "Oh, but you don't know what really happened." And that's because for crime writers writing now, good heavens, the technology is all over it. I mean, seriously, if you've got a mobile phone, which is basically a locator, it still happens. Like that boy that disappeared in Byron Bay, it boggles my mind that nobody can figure that out, because there are cameras everywhere now. You've got your mobile phone on you, it tracks you wherever you go. So for crime writers, it becomes quite the, like herding cats. It becomes quite the difficult thing to try and get it all together. So what you'll find as a recurring thing in crime novels is the lab burnt down. The head technician lost the papers, because you're always constantly trying to keep ahead of forensics. You know, you have to keep ahead of forensics. Although, having gone to a really fantastic Sisters in Crime talk, where it was actually a head coroner in Victoria, it's a fantastic doctor, and she was talking about the legality of so many of the forensics. And she was saying what you crime writers obviously can't do is you can't have somebody go, well, the actual period of crime could be anywhere from Monday to Thursday evening. We can't tell. And also in a court of law, nobody can come up and say, I think the murder was between 8 and 2 in the morning, because the prosecutor will say, well, prove it. And they actually can't. They can't with forensics. The forensics give you a huge jump, but in the field, the closest way you can figure out the time of death still is who was the last person to see them alive. I just found it fascinating. Like, I'm just like, wow, that's so interesting. So she was like, yeah, we often have to push margins out for crimes because we can't prove one way or the other. So, but I've done it in my books, he probably died somewhere on Thursday evening. How do you know? How do you know? You don't.
Well, I think we've just discovered why you set your books in 1956 to avoid all the all those tricksy forensics people with their trackers and their.
But you just have to find the place where the bloody reception is really bad on phone.
Yes,
still happen.
Yeah, absolutely, and you will find that. You will find the deep valley somewhere where somebody says your mobile phone is useless here.
Or Wentworth Falls.
Falls, yeah. I was going to say Falconbridge.
Malla, can I go back to When the Ground is Hard? One of the bits I really loved and made me kind of cringe almost is when Adele's going to catch the bus, right at the beginning. You know she's going to be too late to sit next to Delia, and it's that sort of awful bitchiness between between girls of that age. I thought
Yes.
you captured really well, and trying to get her mother to hurry up, and her mother can't understand why she needs to hurry, and then her mother talking to her through the window and making everything worse. And I just loved that bit. But the other thing I wanted to think about was why Jane Eyre? Is it because of the poverty, because of also the boarding school, you know, part of it, or why Jane Eyre?
Why Jane Eyre? Because I've always, Jane Eyre is one of my favorite books. I remember reading it and kind of going, and I know this is a strange thing, but kind of going, oh, so white people also had really bad time at boarding school. I didn't have any, I had no comparisons. That was the first comparison I could make. There was a girl who was from actually quite a good family, but was moved into a situation where, you know, she had nothing. And the culture,
It's finishing all that.
So I did it because I like Jane Eyre, and also I remember having this actual discussion in class in high school, where my teacher said, "So what do you think of Jane Eyre's decision with Rochester?" And I said, "Well, she could have saved herself all that time if she'd just gone off with him." I got like, and I was like, "Yeah, but like in my culture, why wouldn't you?" You know, but I knew why. I knew why, because that kind of solid determination. She's a person that will not take seconds of anything. But I had to ask that question, and another boy in the class said, "Yeah, I was wondering the same thing. She could have had a great life. Nothing would have burned down." But you know, you can imagine the surprise of having done that and then being doubly betrayed by finding a wife. But I did it because I found Jane was one of the first females that I encountered in literature that I felt like, you know, oh my God, she stands up for herself. She stands up for herself. There's not a lot of females that like stand up for themselves in a lot of books written then. And you look at the hierarchy of things, and Jane did. She stood up for herself. You know, she's like, you think I'm poor and I have these feelings. I find the feelings as you. And she's basically I read a really fantastic article just talking about why doesn't women's writing have this amazing sort of tension that the Bronte sisters had in their books? And, you know, and you're starting to get some of that, I think, coming in now with a lot of Me Too stuff. But, and the writer said, I'll posit that it's because when the Bronte sisters were writing, they had this tremendous sense of female rage. When Jane Eyre says, why is the horizon ever the bounds of my life? Why can't I be like a man and go wherever I want? And she feels that being trapped, you know. So I chose Jane Eyre because I did have that initial response, which is, oh, she could have made everything so much easier from my cultural background. And the girls discuss it in the book, don't they? They say, well, if we were Jane, what would we do? But I did it because Jane Eyre is one of my favorite books. That's why I chose it.
It's definitely a book that passes the Bechdel test, isn't it? If anyone doesn't know what that means,
absolutely.
But because it's got male characters in it, of course, including some of the nastier characters. But at the end of the day, it's really not about. You know, it would have been tempting for you as a young adult writer to introduce some kind of romantic kind of element to it.
Yeah.
Is that something that you thought of? Because that is such a common trope in young adult.
Yeah, you know, I thought of it because my first go around with the manuscript, there was a weird kind of last movement where the girls are off boarding school. I just went off the reservation. It didn't work. But then I thought, oh, there's a possibility there might be a romance here. And I thought, well, no, not really. And it was interesting. I just got a little note from somebody on Instagram who said, thank you for not making this a romance. Thank you.
I was about to say the same. I'm so glad that you didn't, because it made it a much stronger book, I think.
Yeah. Thank you about this being girls trying to figure out their own power and their relationships rather than having, you know, it be this any kind of, and you know, love relationships come in all shapes and sizes. So, you know, I'd say when I think about my own life, probably my mother is one of the great loves of my life. What an enormously amazing person, you know. So love is different shapes and things. So yeah, I was tempted, but then I was like, I just knew it had no place in the book.
Was your mother like the mother in the book, you know, hurling her high heel shoes after a speeding bus?
No, she wasn't. My mother was eminently practical,
Right.
but that person is based on quite a number of my aunties. You know, if there was a who wears the shortest skirt in Swaziland, there would have been three of them. Three of them up for the prize.
Oh, she was quite magnificent in my mind's eye, to be honest with you.
Oh no, she's wonderful. She's wonderful, and I knew that she's based on, as I said, quite an amalgamation of quite a number of my aunts, and Lottie is based quite loosely, but based on an aunt of mine who, and my mother and her sisters. I mean, I was the third generation of my family to go to this mixed race boarding school, and up until me, everyone had been just viciously poor. I mean, and it just meant everything meant something. Everything, the kind of ribbon in your hair, how dirty were your shoes. I mean, everything was such a vicious, small-minded, inward-looking culture, you know, and you're fighting over scraps. I mean, how can you be otherwise, really, you know?
And I suppose it's sort of back to what I was saying at the beginning of this sense of isolation that you managed to get in the place. And I'm fascinated with the idea of negative space and how what isn't said is as powerful as what is said. And you know, without giving away spoilers to anyone who's going to go and read the book and hasn't yet, there's a period about 2/3 of the way through where she's met with this extended silence from someone she really needs to hear from.
Yeah.
And it builds up this incredible sense of tension that.
And also,
so was that was obviously a deliberate ploy on your part to just have complete radio silence to.
Yes. Well, also because I find like I'm the sort of person, and this is why I don't go on social media that much, and I don't even like sending text messages that much, is if I get any radio silence, I don't leave it silent. I fill it in with all sorts of things. That person hasn't gotten back to me. Did I say something wrong? What have I done? What's going on? So the silence itself, it's very unusual for people to be comfortable in silence, actually. I tend to fill it. But that was definitely this kind of feeling of, and also if you've got a problem in your head, then your problem is configured as the center of the universe. But it's not the center of my husband's universe. It's not the center of my agent's universe. It's not, you know, so you then tend to kind of go, oh, what's going on with everyone else being silent? Well, you're in your own head, you know. Not everyone is always part of your little orchestra. But the silence was very deliberate because then it means she in a sense Adele has to then think about what it means and think about her family and she's given this extended little break where she has to do some self-discovery rather than just somebody popping in with their point of view or helping her out, you know. So yeah.
Well, Marla, thank you so much for chatting with us. Unless someone's got another question at this point, but we're really that's the book we've been talking about. Oh, well, yes. I got lost in my background there. Oh, yeah. Look, magic. No. I'm not actually in a bar, just so you know.
Okay.
No, that's right.
So you haven't got a Negroni at your elbow.
No, nor am I in a. Oh, check this. This is so cool. Nor am I in a Escher painting. Yeah, so I recommend the book to anyone who's listening in and is keen. Now we always have an open mic kind of deal. I don't know if anyone's got anything they want to share or read, or if anybody's got a current recommended book that they're wanting to talk about, or anything they'd like to say. Haven't got a lot of time left, so
speed read.
Has anybody got anything they'd like to share? Any recommendation for a book or a...
See What You Made Me Do? I like that one.
Who's that
yeah. Oh, yes, that's good.
Yeah, very good.
So tell me a little bit about that, because I know the title. I don't know what it's about.
We came out of few months back. It's oh God, what's the woman who wrote it?
Jess Hill.
Jessica Hill.
Yeah, it's a non-fiction about where she just rips apart and looks at every single aspect of domestic violence.
Oh, right.
And it was one of the ones that I've read lately that I thought, whoa, really good.
Yeah.
Well worth a read.
Yeah.
So a bit stressy. Like somebody, I'm trying to get my book club, and somebody said, I don't know if I could cope. Let's read the grandmother's collection. I wonder about manners. Like, so, okay, all right. Yeah, but it's not a warm bath book, but you know.
Yeah, I can see that. If anyone's interested in YA that's really comes from left field, it's a book called Pet. I can't remember the author's name. It's actually quite an unusual name, but it's a YA book called Pet, and it's tiny. It's tiny, and it's set in this future place in America, and it's really about how we deal with trauma and how we deal with things that are left unsaid, and how we all feel like the moment a law gets changed, that somehow people change, but really people remain consistently quite the same. So I would recommend that just for something really unusual in terms of young adult stuff.
Could you repeat that? Was it Pat? P-A-T?
P-E-T.
P-E-T, excuse me.
P-E-T, Pet. Yeah. It's just, I've never read a book like it.
Is it about a kid who collects recycled bottles? Is that?
No, it's about a girl. Well, I won't go into any of the spoilers, but certainly a girl's mother is an artist, and one day she draws a monster, and the girl's blood brings a monster alive. And the reason why the monsters come to this town and what the monster really is, and they have to figure out how to bring justice to something that's happened in the town. It's just unusual. It's audacious.
Denise just got very excited then.
Yes, I got really excited. I was looking it up, but I thought, are they considering this for online? For television or for a movie or?
I don't know, but it's certainly won a huge. It's got a great literary. It's won tons of awards.
Yes. I feel like perhaps maybe it was on NPR and I saw it, but. I was, and maybe someone like Jordan Peele had talked about it.
He would be, oh my God, he'd be perfect. I suddenly got so excited that he would be brilliant for this book. Anyway,
he's brilliant.
That's my recommendation.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you. So I'll just let you all know, just before we wrap up, a couple of quick things. Next month, which is going to be, I think, the 6th of August, September, the 7th of September, Monday night, same time, we've got the lovely Kirli Saunders as our guest. Kirli is a poet, an educator, an Indigenous writer. She's got her head all around the various I don't want to use the word issues, around where Indigenous writing sits in this country at the moment, and some of the ideas around that. Very articulate young woman, and she's recently left the Red Room. She was one of the Red Room people, but she's recently left she got a grant to work on a book, so she's left her day job to do that, but she's going to be our guest, so we'd really invite you to come along and hear her talk about whatever and throw some questions at her. And at some point we're also going to have one of the WestWords and Western Sydney University have just gone into a partnership with two young writers who are at a key point in their career, and it's a fellowship / partnership. And one of them is Kavita, whose last name is just completely Bedford, Kavita Bedford, and she and or Rawa Arja are the two who are going. Well, that's the two, and one or both of those will be our guest at some point. And if anyone knows any young writers from Western Sydney who are, or they don't have to be young, they can be old, but very much emerging, have something that they've written that is close to completion, but they just need that next step. We've just opened our applications for the 2021 fellowship. So if you know anyone who is who ticks those boxes, so they get mentorship, they have to do a bit of a workshopy thing. They also get $4,000 to help them take a bit of time off work and do their thing. So there's 3 spaces up for grabs, but all the stuff's on the website. I should have said this at the very beginning. If anyone's got a problem, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I was recording this, so it's going to go on our YouTube channel. Every time, I always mean to say it at the beginning and then I forget. So you could really throw the cat amongst the pigeons right now if somebody went, actually, I'm not comfortable with that.
It's too late.
Require some very, very, very creative editing, I think. Anything anyone wants to say before we wrap it up? No? Okay. Well, Malla Nunn, once again, thank you so much for being our guest. And we really appreciate you coming and talking to us.
Oh, it's been delightful. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Malla.
Thank you, Malla. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, guys.
Before we go, James, I'd just like to say lots of love from the rest of the country to everybody in Melbourne right now. We really...
Yes, definitely, yes.
Thank you. Thank you for somebody who lives in Melbourne, because we're beginning to feel a bit, and Denise, a bit paranoid, aren't we, as everybody attacks us ruthlessly in every medium.
Well, I think you know, where I am, we just feel it's only a whisker away from it being anywhere else in the country. So the sacrifices that you people are making are really crucially important. All my family's in Victoria. I'm not. So take care and don't go crazy.
So are you working from home again now, Margot? Is that?
Yeah. Well, I haven't been on campus since March, because we had that little brief, about a week, and now, of course, you know, it's the next 6 weeks.
Imagine how much you're saving on parking fees and coffee.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they actually gave us back our funds for that. I was due to, well, we actually, it was right just after January, we were up in Singapore teaching, and I made a big stink about, don't you see what's going on? And then we came back just as everything started to really go awry. So I've been, much like Margot, at home and teaching from home. So
where are you based, Denise? You're at Monash, aren't you?
I'm at Monash, yes. So at the Clayton Peninsula and Singapore. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, all jokes aside, I think that Sydney, as Suzanne says, Sydney's not that far off. You go for a drive anywhere and you see people all gathered in tight groups and you go, you're just not getting it, are you? You're just not.
I don't drive anywhere. I've been stuck at Lawson for the last 4 months, and we're teaching from home too.
Mm-mm. But it's still better than the States. It's still better than the States. And so I've been in contact with my family, and that's been really, really tough because they're in pediatrics. So my parents are in medicine, my sister's in medicine. So it's really, this is brilliant here in comparison. So.
Indeed. Well, on that somber note, yes, our best wishes to everyone. No, that's okay. No, I meant the whole. No, I'm not trying to. No, that's fine. Suzanne, what were you going to say? Oh, you're muted, Suzanne.
Blowing kisses to Victorians.
Thank you, Suzanne.
All right, thank you, everyone, and hopefully we'll see you again next month.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks,
Thank you.
James. Thanks, Malla.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.